So we won't talk to the two of you. We'll talk to you both after. Here's the Prime Minister of Canada now.
Bonjour à tous. Hello, everyone. Before we get started, I want to note that today marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands. On this day, we remember the Canadians and Newfoundlanders who liberated the Netherlands from the tyranny of the Nazis. We also pay tribute to the deep bonds that were forged between Canada and the Netherlands. We honor the incredible courage and sacrifice of our veterans, in whom we are forever in their debt. Time and time again, Canadians step up in periods of crisis to help each other and to help our friends. We saw it 75 years ago on the battlefields of the Second World War, and we're seeing it once again during this pandemic. Ces jours-ci,
these days, everyone working in the food industry is working harder than ever to fill the shelves of our grocery stores. They continue to work long hours to feed us, and the pandemic is making things more complicated for them. Workers must take additional measures to protect themselves. They must change the way they work and respect physical distancing. And since hotels and restaurants are closed, many producers are now dealing with significant surpluses of certain goods. From the outset, we have said we would be there for people who need a hand. So today, we are announcing a new investment of more than $252 million to help the agri-food industry and help it get through this crisis. Of that amount, we will be allocating more than $77 million to food processors in order to protect the safety of their workers. This is money that they will be able to use to buy more personal protective equipment or adjust their hygiene protocols or other measures such as physical distancing. It will also allow processors to adapt their plants so that they can produce more goods in Canada.
We're announcing more than $77 million to support food processors during this crisis. This is money that they can use to purchase personal protective equipment for workers, adapt to health protocols, and support other social distancing measures. It will also help expand or adapt our processing capacity to increase the amount of Canadian products we make domestically.
To help pork and beef producers, we are putting in place Agri-Recovery, a national program with an envelope of $125 million to help farmers adapt to market changes. Farms and pork producing businesses are producing things like beef and bacon for us, and we have to ensure that those animals can remain on the farm longer than usual, and that is costly. The money we're announcing today will help pork and beef producers to adapt to this crisis. This is an initial investment, and if we have to do more, we will do more.
To help cattle and hog producers, we will launch a $125 million National Agri-Recovery Initiative. Farms and processing plants are raising more animals than the system can process into things like steak and bacon because of COVID-19. For many farmers, this crisis means that they have to keep animals for longer periods of time, and that can be expensive. So with this funding, we're giving extra help to beef and pork producers so that they can adapt to this crisis. This is an investment, and if we need to add more, we will.
With respect to dairy farmers, we intend to work with all the parties in the House to increase by $200 million the credit line of the Canadian Dairy Commission. The Commission already has a program in place to store dairy products. It stores butter and cheese, and has been since the beginning of this crisis, and hopes and expects to reach its maximum capacity soon. By increasing its credit line, we will not waste fresh products, and dairy producers will be more able to deal with the consequences of this crisis.
Closed. Too much of certain types of food, like milk, butter, and potatoes, is being produced. While some donations have been made to food banks, we don't have the capacity right now to redistribute such large quantities of food. And some producers have no choice but to throw out their product. It's a waste of food and a loss of revenue for the people who worked so hard to produce it. To avoid this, we're launching a surplus food purchase program, starting with a $50 million fund. The government will buy large quantities of certain products at risk of going waste, say, potatoes or poultry, and redistribute them to organizations addressing food insecurity. This will help ensure that our farmers are being compensated for their hard work and that our most vulnerable have access to fresh food during this crisis. Taken together, these measures represent a $252 million investment to support the people who keep our grocery stores stocked and our families fed. Je veux d'ailleurs prendre un moment pour souligner le travail de la ministre Bibeau.
And in fact, I'd like to take a moment to thank Minister Bibeau for her work on this file.
We know that farmers still have concerns about what this pandemic means for their industry long term. Having enough workers for harvesting later in the season, having enough personal protective equipment for workers. These are valid concerns. And I can assure you that we are working with farmers, stakeholders, and provinces and territories to find lasting solutions. I want to close today by thanking every person who works in our food industry. People are spending a lot more time in the kitchen, cooking for an elderly neighbor, cooking for themselves, discovering new recipes, trying to make sourdough. These days especially, cooking and baking is about more than nourishment. It's also about relieving stress, finding a community, supporting each other, creating memories. You help make that possible. So we're here for all of you in the agri-food industry, and we will continue to be here for you. To
all of you working in the food industry, thank you for everything you're doing for us. We are there for you, and we will continue to be there for you. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Première question, Michel Lamarche, TVA Nouvelle, à vous.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Today you are thanking all the farmers and food producers, but the Canadian Federation of Agriculture was asking you for $2.6 billion in assistance because the crisis is really hitting them hard. You're nowhere near that amount. What do you say to them? Well, this is an initial investment. We know that there will certainly need to be more done as the needs increase, and this is money that we are sending out immediately to help our farmers and agricultural producers, and we will continue to work with them to address other needs.
En suivi.
Follow up? I'd like you to comment on the short-term projections of Health Canada. Once again, the number of deaths is higher than what Health Canada had expected for now. Why is Canada too optimistic about its results? The modeling we have established is there to guide our decisions and help us to prepare for any eventuality. This has never been an exact prediction of what could happen, but rather a general idea of what could happen. And therefore, we have been able to adjust as things went on. We saw an adjustment in the curve, but as you say, there is still reason for concern, and we will continue to adjust our projections and to respond as the reality changes.
Modeling has always been there, not as a crystal ball to tell us what was going to happen, but to tell us the range of things that might happen, depending on our behaviors, depending on measures brought in. That's why we've been constantly updating it, constantly moving forward with new measures to try and make sure we're doing everything we can to keep Canadians safe, and we will continue to do just that.
Merci. Opérateur, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Stephanie Levitz, The Canadian Press. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. When you briefed Canadians about the helicopter crash last week, did you know there were eyewitnesses, and why did it take 12 hours to confirm that the helicopter had crashed?
The military has very important protocols in place when there is a tragic incident like this around informing the next of kin, of talking to the families as quickly as possible before sharing information with the general public. All those protocols were followed.
Follow-up question?
Yeah, as a follow-up, in your remarks, you made a point of thanking Minister Bibeau with regards to her work on agriculture. There's been a lot of frustration coming out of that community that the relatively delayed response to their demands as it compares to, let's say, more urban concerns is a direct reflection of the lack of support for your government in the prairie provinces. Can you address that?
We move forward initially with supports for workers in all industries across the country. With the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, with the wage subsidy, with measures to support small businesses. These are the kinds of things that have had an impact in urban and rural areas. Furthermore, we've continued to work with farmers and food producers right across the country to respond to their needs. We have a large and varied country in terms of the challenges being faced in different regions, and we've been very diligent about responding to agricultural industry right across the country, including with a significant announcement today that's going to help people right across the country.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Steve Shear, Reuters. Line open.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for taking my question. The Canadian Federation of Agriculture had asked for support for all farmers. The announcement today seems to be targeted to specific sectors. What do you say to producers in the vegetable industry or the grain industry that are also facing serious cash crunches right now?
Every step of the way in this crisis, we've been responding in targeted ways to the industries that need our support in as rapid a fashion as we can. The first things we did was put out broad-based support to workers in industries right across the country that could continue to pay their rent, pay their groceries as quickly as possible with the CERB, with now the wage subsidy, with other measures to support small businesses, and we're continuing to do just that. There are certain sectors that are more pressing in their needs for supports, but like I said, this is only an initial amount of support. We will continue to work with farmers, with stakeholders and industry representatives, with provinces and territories to ensure that our food capacity in this country and those people who work so incredibly hard every single day to feed Canadians get the support that they need through this crisis and beyond.
As a follow-up?
And you say this is an initial amount of funding, but the initial ask from the Canadian Federation of Agriculture was $2.6 billion. Spring season is starting now, so do you have a timeline for when the additional funding that you're thinking could come is going to show up?
We're responding to pressing needs in terms of processors, in terms of predictability and support for farmers and for producers. We know that there is more to do, and we will keep working with them to determine exactly how we can best help. We will be there for our agricultural producers because they are so important to all Canadians. The hard work they do and the support they give us all needs to be respected, reflected on, and mostly supported.
Merci. Opérateur, dernière question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Louis-Samuel Perron, La Presse. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur
Yes, good
Trudeau.
morning,
De
Mr.
nombreux
Trudeau.
producteurs de fruits et de
Many
légumes
fruit and vegetable producers are worried about the situation because of the lack of foreign temporary workers. Will you provide specific help to them? Well, I can say that starting now, or up until now, we have received almost 90% of foreign temporary workers that we would normally be bringing in at this time of the year. We also recognize that during the harvesting season, there will be a need for additional foreign temporary workers, and we are currently working with the industry to ensure that we can meet those needs. Follow up? Yes. The facilities like meat packers are areas of a major outbreak. Do you intend to shut them down if the situation does not improve? The measures that we are announcing today will improve in slaughterhouses, will improve the situation in slaughterhouses and meat packing facilities by further protecting the employees. We know it's important to protect the employees and ensure that the food supply chain remains intact, and that's exactly what we're doing.
These companies that run these meatpacking plants, they're big multinational organizations. So why is it up to the federal government to make sure that they keep their workers safe?
We are, of course, supporting the provinces on their initiatives to keep their workers safe. This is something the federal government is happy to help with. Indeed, the responsibility is shared from the owners and operators of the plants to the provincial government, but the federal government is happy to be part of creating solutions in this situation where we're in an unprecedented crisis. We need to keep people safe, but we also need to ensure a supply of food for Canadians.
And a lot of the workers that work in these plants, they're not just working in cramped conditions, they're living in cramped conditions. So is there any of this money or is there anything more the government can do to help them so that they're not just keep them from spreading COVID-19 at the workplace, but also at home?
Well, part of the money that we're sending to help this industry and these areas is to look at the different ways they can keep their employees and these workers safe. These are things that the provinces will have to look at very closely, but the federal government, as always, will be there to support and to make sure that Canadians' food supply is safe while we keep people safe from COVID-19. Okay.
Of course, there are shared responsibilities between the owners and operators of these facilities in the province and the provinces that have control over what happens there as well. But the federal government will certainly be there to help because this is a concern for all of us in terms of ensuring the integrity of the food supply in Canada and also ensuring the safety of the workers and avoiding seeing any progress in the disease. Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada, can you tell us exactly when that money will be in the pockets of farmers and processors? Because we're hearing that some of those measures are not ready to be implemented, particularly those for dairy producers. First of all, I'd like to point out that Minister Bibeau has been working very hard on these issues, and she will be at the press conference later on to take specific questions on that. Regarding support for dairy producers, we will be increasing their credit line. This is one that they've had for some time. But in order to do that, we will have to pass legislation in the House of Commons. So we will be working with all the parties in the House to help our dairy producers. Now, one of the impacts of the crisis would be on the cost of groceries in Canada, and I guess that will be seen in the coming weeks and months. Have you included something to deal with that? Is there something the federal government can do to help Canadians and families who may have trouble absorbing those extra costs? From the very outset, this government has been there to help Canadians, whether it's through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit or the wage subsidy or specific measures for communities and charities. We will always respond to the needs of Canadians. We need to keep people safe and healthy. And from the beginning of the crisis, the government has been there and will continue to be.
CTV National News, you talked about food waste. Do you have any idea how much food Canadian farmers were forced to throw out? And is this announcement too late when we think of what's already been lost?
We know we're in an unprecedented crisis, and we've had to respond very, very quickly. Unfortunately, there have been a number of farmers who've had to dispose of surplus production. But at the same time, this is a new program we're bringing in around surplus food that will invest $50 million in buying much of that surplus and ensuring that it doesn't go to waste. It goes to communities and families who actually need support in terms of food security. It is not a perfect situation by any stretch, but we are doing what we can to try and make sure that people are rewarded for their hard work and that others aren't going hungry. Okay. Depuis le début, on essaye
From the very beginning,
de répondre à cette
we've been trying to respond to this unprecedented situation. And we have seen some producers having to destroy some of their products. Now, we don't want to see this kind of waste happening, so we have created a $50 million program which will allow us to pay the producers for their work while ensuring the food security of all people in Canada, including the most vulnerable.
Food exporters in the world. How bad is our backlog to get food out to foreign markets right now? And what's the plan from the federal government to ensure that Canadian products get out there so farmers can plan accordingly?
We've seen significant disruptions in global supply chains. We are working very hard to continue to maintain supply chains to our major markets, particularly the United States, but also others around the world, because food security is a preoccupation for everyone, and Canada is an important part of the solution. We need to make sure we're doing the best we can. We also need to make sure that we have enough food for Canadians as well, but we are confident that our extraordinary, hardworking farmers and producers in the agricultural industry will be up to the task, and we will be there to support them every step of the way.
Prime Minister Janet Silver, Global News. Earlier, you said that your government was working with farmers and stakeholders to find long-term solutions for labor shortages for fruit and vegetable producers. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on what options you are looking at to address those labor shortages.
We recognize that there is a need for extra help when it comes to harvesting fruits and vegetables in the coming months. And that's why Minister Bibeau, who will be at the press conference at noon, will be able to answer your questions on what exactly we're looking at in terms of ensuring that producers have the support they need.
And if I could switch gears a little bit, you're announcing money today for the agricultural sector. The airline industry is saying they will not be able to get through the financial challenges of COVID-19 without some sort of government assistance. And I'm wondering when there is an announcement expected on this and if it will come with any conditions.
First of all, I want to highlight how pleased we are that a number of airlines have taken on the wage subsidy, the ability to rehire hardworking Canadians who haven't been able to work because flights have been so massively reduced, is a good thing for their families, good thing for their communities, and a good thing for the industry as well, to ensure that people who work in the airline industry will continue to be connected to those jobs that will come back once this pandemic is through. At the same time, as I said yesterday, we are looking at more specific sectoral supports for industries and areas that are particularly hard hit because of COVID-19. We think of the tourism sector, we think of the energy sector, we think of the airline industry. We are working very closely with experts and industry representatives to see what kind of support we can do to ensure that the systems and the economy that we had that was flourishing before this pandemic will continue to do well for all Canadians for the coming years.
First of all, we're very pleased that the airline industry has chosen to take advantage of the wage subsidy, because that will allow people that work in that industry to keep their job, even though there are practically no more flights, and then be able to get back to work quickly once the crisis has ended. At the same time, we recognize that certain industries will need additional support, and we are now working with experts and with industry to see exactly how we can support them so that our economy that was very healthy before this crisis will also return to its former state of health, perhaps with the same structures or even better structures as before.
Merci tout le monde. Bonne journée.
Prime Minister of Canada, outside of his home, Rideau Cottage, giving us a briefing today about his government's response to the pandemic. Ending a little earlier than usual, I should tell you, because the Prime Minister will appear at the COVID-19 committee, parliamentary committee,